It went without saying that the item had restorative properties. It could heal wounds, restore one's strength, and replenish one's life force. I wonder if it does anything else, he thought, his eyes shining thoughtfully. He wasn't certain if this violet crystal had anything to do with the opening of the god's eyes, but it seemed like a good possibility. Regardless, it was a precious treasure. He had never in his entire life heard of anything so spectacular. With something as useful as this in his possession, he might well have a second life. However, the only reason he managed to get his hand on it was that he was the only living person in the city to find it. Once the blood rain stopped and he left, how could he possibly keep the thing safe? He had to think of a good way to hide the violet crystal. After some thought, he pulled out the unconscious bird he'd picked up earlier. After binding its beak so it couldn't cry out, he took the dagger from his thigh and sliced open a cut on the creature. The bird struggled vainly as Su King then pushed the violet crystal into the wound. Then he kept his eyes wide open as he watched what happened. Despite the bird struggling, the air rippled and flowed with spirit power. In fact, there was far more spirit power at work than when Su King practiced cultivation, and it all moved toward the bird. The bird suddenly struggled with much more force than before, until Su King was having trouble restraining it. As he did, the spirit power that entered him separated from the mutagen. Therefore, it was only pure spirit power that flowed through his meridians and into his body. A moment later, popping sounds rang out from inside him. It was almost as if silt that had been choking his insides was being cleared out. At the same time, his flesh and blood felt invigorated and healthy. Within his mind appeared the image of a goblin, extremely lifelike and energetic. Though the sea and mountain incantation was a cultivation technique, it wasn't a cultivation magic, but rather a body refinement method. It was divided into 10 levels that corresponded to the 10 levels of qi condensation. His bamboo slip gave a clear introduction, explaining that each level provided the strength of a tiger. The strength of 5 tigers ultimately combined to make the strength of a goblin, and the strength of 2 goblins combined to make the strength of a hobgoblin. According to the popular saying, goblins can move mountains, hobgoblins can transport seas, and thus the name of the technique came to be the sea and mountain incantation. The violet crystal in his chest was like a whirlpool, constantly rotating as it sucked in masses of spirit power. Su King's cultivation advanced dramatically. It was hard to say how much time passed, but eventually the popping sounds inside of him grew more and more intense. Filth oozed out of the pores in his body, and a noxious aroma filled the little cave. Walking back to the entrance of the cave, he looked out through the crack and tried to decide if he should wait until it was light to go and do some tests. Only a moment passed before a vigilant expression took over his face. Leaning his head closer to the crack, he strained his ears to detect any sound from outside. It was completely dark outside, but he couldn't hear any of the usual bizarre sounds. He had been in this place for days and had never experienced anything like this. Furthermore, even during the daytime, when the sound of the grooves and mutant beasts ceased, there would still be the sound of the blood rain. But right now, he couldn't hear the rain. Don't tell me. His heart pounded as he considered the implications. He waited in silence for a time until a dazzling ray of sunlight shot down entered the crack in the cave entrance and illuminated everything within. The light caused Zhu King to tremble. He reached his hand out to intercept the beam of light, and when he felt the warmth, it slowly brought him back to his senses. Sunlight. A moment passed, then Zhu King's eyes shone with excitement. Unsealing the crack, he slowly stepped out into the sunlight. Looking up, he didn't see any of the dark clouds that had filled the sky before. Instead, he saw the dazzling sun. That light was like a sick old man who had a new lease on life and was finally coming to visit the human world. The rain, it stopped. Su Qing took in a deep breath of the sun-filled air, then looked around at the ruined city bathed in the morning glow. The city seemed dazzling in a way he'd never imagined it could be. As the sunlight shot past the crimson clouds on the horizon, it seemed like countless golden whales swimming through the sky. It swept away the sickly fog in the city, revealing the damage that had previously been concealed. Collapsed houses were everywhere, interspersed with greenish-black corpses and ghastly pools of blood. Those were the sights that roused Su Qing from his stupor and reminded him of the catastrophe that had befallen this place. Mixed emotions appeared in his eyes. He had lived for 6 years in the slums outside the walls of this city. In other words, it had been for 6 years that he gazed down on this place. Though he had been in the city on numerous occasions, during that entire 6 years, he had only dreamed of actually living inside. I found my cultivation technique here. I got the violet crystal here. I lived here. After a while, he sighed softly, then walked over to one of the greenish-black corpses. He looked down at it, stooped, and pulled the corpse onto his back. Then he started walking. Eventually, he reached a public square, where he put the corpse down. Turning, he went and found a second corpse, then a third, and a fourth. Some corpses just lay on the street. Others were buried in rubble. Some corpses were intact. Others were mangled. One by one, he took as many as he could find and carried them on his back to the square, where he piled them up into a small mountain. Eventually, he stood in front of the mountain of corpses with a torch in his hand. He tossed the fire onto the mountain. Perhaps because of the mutagen, the flame burned hot and the smoke rose thick into the air above him. He stared at the smoke for a while, then walked to the city's second district. Before long, smoke rose up from that district as well, thicker and thicker. As the brilliant sun shone down on the city, the place became full of the smoke of burning corpses. The smoke obscured the sun, causing everything to turn red. It was like the sun was heaving a deep sigh, and the streams of smoke were its tears. The shadows cast by the smoke were tear stains on the earth. The final tear stain led Zhu King to the area where he'd found the violet crystal. He took the old man from the medicine shop and added him to a pile of corpses to burn. As he stood to the side, watching the flames, they reflected in his dark pupils, flickering endlessly. The tips of Zhu King's long, disheveled hair curled in the heat. Eventually, he clasped his hands and bowed deeply. "May you rest in peace." The flames burned even hotter, sending sparks up like dandelion wisps to float away in the breeze. However, the smoke that drifted up contained unending regret and defiance that could never be dispelled. It rose high, like scars in the sky. Insignificant and pointless. Sometime later, the sound of footsteps rang out, and then a bizarre and mystifying voice spoke from behind Shu King. I was wondering why I didn't see any corpses around here. It turns out a skinny little brat was wasting his energy cremating them. Whatever. Since you miss them so much, I'll help you join them. Shu King spun in place.